Well, welcome back to part two of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. And I'd actually like to begin with asking a question in terms of South Africa and the position that we find ourselves in by asking just how vulnerable are we to foreign aligned powers in this country, considering the fact that since democracy, and we know that South Africa, we've had a very hard fought democracy to get to where we are at this point in time, but also in terms of determining our own future as a country, maintaining our own sovereignty and respect. And this is the reason why we are talking this evening to both my guest, Allan Horwitz, who is a member of South African Jews for Palestine, and also Paul Hendler, South African Jewish activist. Because if you have been following developments during the course of the weekend, what has been reborn is SIPEC, and this is an Israeli lobby group talking about the threat to South Africa's sovereignty. Now, from what we've learned is this was a lobby group that was formed way back in 2011. And the question is, why is this now become a major talking point, and why this has become a subject of discussion? Allan Horwitz and Paul Hendler, to both of you, we welcome you to the show. We thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, to kick off, just to say that SAPAC is modeled on the American APAC. And that is in existence for over 20 years. It's a club of Christian and Jewish billionaires, Zionists. So you have a combination of enormous wealth and an ideology that is particularly toxic. And it's no accident that they cluster around Trump, who is the ultimate megalomaniac and a very, very unstable person who's essentially been bought by big business. And when we say big business, we mean the biggest corporations in America, if not the world. So SAPAC similarly is backed by big business and by Zionists of every description. But I think it's safe to say that Jewish billionaires are the key drivers of this. And we find, of course, that the political class, well, in America, the Epstein class, is just so vulnerable to the wealthy, the super wealthy. And in South Africa, that's no different. We find Biz News and those who are interviewed are particularly noxious, and they willfully undermine every effort by the South African government to support the Palestinian cause and now Iranian sovereignty, or whether it's Cuba, Venezuela, wherever the American hegemony seems to have been threatened, then they step in. So it might be that Israel and its agenda, which is basically to fragment and destroy any coherent possible challenge to its expulsion of the Palestinian people and the settling of their land. So APAC and now SAPAC will be there. So it's part of a global right-wing fascist movement. And Zionism for decades has been central to that movement, that I think over the last 20, 30 years, it's safe to say, in a very, very blatant way, where we have wars of aggression as the only method for the Zionists to establish their state and, of course, to expand it. So, yes, SAPAC is a very, very disturbing phenomenon.
Well, it certainly is, Allan, from what you've described. And, I'd just like Paul to actually comment on what you've just had to say, because, you spoke about the Epstein class. And we've seen in just over a year since Donald Trump has taken office, in terms of what APAC and the billionaire class that you actually speak of are capable of within America as well. So it's not only about interfering in the sovereignty of a country as well. What it actually does to the local people, the local population. We've seen ICE, we've seen how people have been treated in their own country, and this is where this billionaire class comes in, Paul. And interestingly, Faiz Jacobs actually made a comment about saying that a sovereign people must know how domination works. It seldom arrives announcing itself as domination. And is this your reading into SIPEC as well, in terms of what it may perhaps its short to medium term or even long term intended goals are for this country?
Yes, I'm generally in agreement. I think your point about long-term goals is important because this is not a recent phenomenon. IPAC has been SIPAC is recent, certainly as an attempt or attempted organizational structure to be found. I think David Hirsch in 2011, 2012 or whatever tried to set it up, and now they've come back again. But if we go to IPAC as a sort of foundational model, I think it was founded more than 20 years ago. My understanding is it came about already in the late 50s. And it's been playing a role in influencing United States government policy for decades. It's, of course, not the only lobby group. And the sort of influences that drive a lot of American domestic and foreign policy are very class colored, and in recent decades you've had the emergence of a far more dominant oligarchic class of financial capital, energy capital, maybe having some conflict with it, but so IPAC fits into that sort of sphere, and it was equally dominant over Obama long before Trump arrived, and certainly over the predecessors to Obama, the Bushes and the Clintons, who's all had to declare fealty to IPAC and Israel en route to the White House. So that's just a point I'd like to make, because I think this control by corporate capital and the Zionist sort of side of that has been very, very strong in America for decades now. In South Africa, we also have a very strong corporate control of government policy, but the Zionist side has always been frustrated that it couldn't do what it was able to do in the States. And you pick it up, if you sit on some of their meetings, as I have, and you hear their frustrations about not being able to bring the ANC to heel, and particularly Ramaphosa, after the 7th of October was an enormous cause of anger to them. I remember Rowan Palovan, then president of the SA Zionist Federation, making a statement after Ramaphosa and his cabinet appearing with Palestinian paraphernalia and attire in solidarity shortly after the 7th of October breakout from the Gaza concentration camp, and they were extremely angry that none of their efforts at trying to get him business deals, and they actually mentioned those words, had paid off. And so I think what we have now is a new attempt to get the government far more influenced. And they already have, I think, a quarter of the government on their side, in the government of national unity, mainly called around the DA, and some of these smaller groups like Mackenzie's groups and Musi Maimani's group and others who are clearly unquestioningly pro-Israel, supporting them. And I would imagine that the move now to initiate SIPAC is maybe to try and take this gap at the moment and to build on it, maybe with an eye on, I'm speculating here, but maybe with an eye on later local government elections this year, where they can try and make these pro-Israel policies more emphatic, at a local level or a metro level also, and start building that momentum. It is, I think, a great cause for concern, and yet to go back to your very early comment about how vulnerable we are in South Africa, this African state, and its sovereignty to this type of influence. I think it's very vulnerable. I think it's politically, economically vulnerable. I think its strongest point is probably ideological, through the ANC and the ICJ case is an example of that. But it is vulnerable, and I think the presence of a vociferous and ideologically quite unified and strong solidarity movement in this country is no small factor in, I think, why the more progressive people in the ANC government and the ANC itself were able to carry, the case into the ICJ, and I think they need that bolstering from outside to resist this this very strong influence that is coming to bear now.
Certainly, Paul. And also, Allan, I think, just talking about from a position of being vulnerable, and the question is, some of these actors with the inside.
Sorry, I lost you there.
Sorry, can you hear me, Allan?
Now I can hear you. Continue, please.
Yes, I'm saying, from a position where we portray ourselves as being vulnerable, and just to understand how dangerous are these some of these people that are operating with inside pack, who come across sometimes as benevolent players, harmless democratic actors, for want of a better term. But obviously they have gained some access. They have gained they've exerted a fair amount of influence as well, in terms of how narratives are being framed in this country. And we see with this elite capture and how this could possibly impact on South Africa in the long term, particularly with regard to policy. Paul, I know you touched upon in terms of political interference as well, and touching on the local government elections. So just to understand, you have an organization that portrays to be harmless, but can be extremely dangerous, Allan.
I think, we can't underestimate these people, because they have influence at the highest reaches of government. Patrice Motsepe and African Rainbow Minerals are partners with Glencore and have now become the biggest suppliers of coal to Israel in the world. And the BDS coalition has tried for the last 3 years to pinpoint this very, very dangerous practice. We are fueling apartheid, genocidal Israel in a direct way, notwithstanding the ICJ referral. As we know, he's a Christian Zionist. He's one of the few black billionaires in Africa, and he's very, very tied up with, let's say, the Zionist Jewish lobby through Investec and other corporations. So I must say it is quite commendable that Cyril has held the line on the ICJ case, because in no other instance, apart from the expulsion recently of that Israeli diplomat who was very directly involved, in Pondoland with the local Tembu king, and his shenanigans in terms of different Israeli-inspired agricultural programs and so on, and tried to force the issue that the ANC doesn't represent the majority of South Africans. So we can't in any way relax. Unfortunately, not taken enough direct action. We have relied on petitions, on memoranda, some marches or demonstrations, but we haven't actually gone to Richards Bay and tried to shut down that coal terminal. And we're facing a particularly brutal and relentless and immoral enemy. The Israeli regime today has entered neo-Nazi territory. So it's not as if a country that abides by the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights can sit by idly and pretend that this is a sort of a mildly rogue regime. It's now entered the extreme annals of brutality. And the United States, of course, is a full backer of this. So when we look at AIPAC, we're seeing a fascist cabal who basically bought the American president. And we know that Trump, I mean, this question of white genocide in South Africa, as farcical as it is, he's actually sold that to quite a constituency in the United States and in other countries where white supremacists, they talk about the white race being overwhelmed by the brown hordes in the rest of the world from, the collective South. So the fault lines are racial and ideological and, of course, financial in terms of neoliberal capitalism entering what I'd say is its death throes. This war in Iran is colossal in terms of this power struggle, a global power struggle. Coming back to South Africa, I mean, we're a small element in the world economy. We don't count for much, but we do have symbolic value. When the Iranian vessel came to Cape Town, when was it, 2 months ago, to join other BRICS navies, and Cyril was on the back foot and ostensibly said, no, must tell the Iranians to leave, but the military in South Africa stood firm. That was quite extraordinary, which does show us that there's a groundswell of support for Palestine and that our government is actually soft peddling. So really we need to up the ante. We need to be more forceful in terms of demanding the cessation of the coal trade, the diamond trade, and in fact, any type of, working together with Israeli universities or other institutions. We have to impose a total boycott. And of course, now with Iran being on the firing line, but actually fighting back in an extraordinary way. One doesn't have to be a total admirer of the Iranian government, but they're holding the line for the rest of the world against a wave of, destruction and wanton killing that is, becoming something that threatens to lead to a third world war.
Certainly, Allan.
And I think that us as a movement, we are a bit slow to give maximum support.
Yes, but also, Paul, Allan speaks about a soft peddling. And my question would be, do we have what it takes at this point in time in anticipation of the political danger that this country could face once an organization like SIPEC would exert its influence and even gain perhaps a foothold or a footprint and tentacles into government? And because clearly, there is a political danger that is associated with this. And looking at a government, you need a government that is strong enough to confront the danger.
I don't know, Paul, if you want to comment, but I'd say very quickly to that a country can, you can sell your soul as an individual and as a society. And when in social terms, basic principles, I think it affects the whole tenor of life. It affects your economic, your academic, your technical performance, because you're living wholly in a material realm, and that the question of human relations and rights and the simple question of justice, when a society loses focus on that simple and basic element, you get dislocation, you get alienation, you get violence, and of course you find that in the end you become a vassal, become a slave to another society. And the United States wants global hegemony in every respect, political, military, or economic. And we know how disastrous that is for other societies and to a great extent to Americans. So I think, yes, there is a danger, but we have to face up to it. We have to be smarter, we have to work harder, and we have to show that our principles are not for sale.
Yes, Allan, but also I think, Paul, just to answer that question as well, and I was going to have a leading question, are we strong enough to confront this danger at this point in time? Because, politically, we've had, in the past, we've had some very powerful political figures in the form of people like Dr. Naledi Pandor, for example, who basically stood her ground. I mean, do we have what it takes, another Naledi Pandor or someone like her in government to confront these dangers?
Hey, connected, can you hear me?
Paul? Yes, okay, go ahead.
So we need to clarify who is we, okay? But before I go there, I think this formation of SIPAC is just another sort of addition to a very well-established network of Zionist organizations that falls under the umbrella of the SA Zionist Federation, and it's been around for a long time. It's embedded already, it's very well established, but it has struggled, as I said earlier, but it's now got to a point where with the GNU and the ANC losing, its majority, that it's got much more of a toehold in government. So when we get back to your question, who is we? Is we the sort of ANC component of the GNU, which I think is about 75% or whatever, or is it that component plus the EFF plus MK party in terms of the parliamentary state system, which I think would take us up to 66% of those institutions? Is it the much broader state with different departments and institutions? My sense, I think all those would have to be unpacked in a more concrete way, but my sense from the bit of research I've done here and there, for example, in the educational field, around the embeddedness of a school like Herzliya, and it would apply to Weizmann and King David, which was recently involved in a public issue, as you know. Also, I think there's a lot embedded already of Zionist sympathies or empathies almost in the South African ideological state apparatuses, and they very clearly linked into the Israeli state apparatuses through visits to Israel and such things. If you start looking at our police services, there are clearly at the upper echelon of the police services connections with the SA Jewish Board of Deputies, which claims to represent to be the democratic representative of Jewish South Africans. Now that's a mythology, but the reality is that the SA Jewish Board of Deputies is a Zionist proxy in South Africa, and it does not represent almost a third of Jewish South Africans who have not, according to their own Zionist surveys, nailed their mast to the ideology of Zionism. So what I'm trying to say is I think there's a lot of fragmentation in the South African government, in the South African state, in the ANC itself, in different departments between the forces that are, call them progressive anti-Zionist, and those that are the friends of Israel. And I think it's been building up for quite a long time. And I think SIPAC's appearance is another move in the wrong direction. And yes, we do need to be quite concerned. But there's a lot of networked infrastructure, and they've done a lot of homework there to have given the Zionists, to have given themselves certain influence in certain South African state apparatuses. But let us not underestimate the impact of the Palestine solidarity movement, which has got a long and quite rich and deep history, also integrated into other movements in South Africa around popular demands for South African workers, and which has had an impact on government policy. And I use the ICJ case as an example, but that clearly is contradicted by what Allan is talking about with the coal trading and those other class networks that go on. So I think we have yes, we do have to up our ante. We do have to up our game. And when I say we, I'm thinking specifically of the Palestine solidarity formations. And I think one of our weaknesses is a more medium-term strategy. I think we're very good at mobilizing, at getting onto the streets, at picketing, at boycotting Cape Union Mart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we need to go one step further into the organizations that are trying, and to help organizations that are trying to organize grassroots working class communities in this country. And one of the opportunities is the local government elections coming up later this year, where even a few independent candidates, progressive candidates that would take a stance, an anti-Zionist stance at a local level, would be a start. It could start, a process. But sadly, I don't see within our movement the momentum towards that. And a lot of it isn't because people disagree with what I'm saying. A lot of it is because there's simply a limit to resources. There's a limit to time. There's a limit to funds. We're fighting legal battles also. But somehow we need to find a focal point around, I think it's November this year. And we need to embed this type of global consciousness, geopolitical consciousness, and how central the fight against Zionism and Israel is to the anti-US imperialist struggle at a local level. Because I think people, I pick up from a weekly picket outside Cape Union Mart here in Stellenbosch, okay, just talking to ordinary people. I pick up a hunger and an openness to hearing this message, and it just reinforces the point I've been making, that we need to capitalize on that and start building organization and not just mobilizing and protesting.
Well, certainly, Paul, but also I think to bring Allan back into the discussion. Allan, I think what is also absolutely critical is from what Paul is saying, and sometimes we seem to be operating in silos, because there is this grave danger. There is no doubt, hearing from what both you, Allan, and Paul are saying, that SIPAC is obviously highly organized, highly influential, the billionaire class, and when one comes up against billionaires and people with money, sometimes, we have our backs to the wall. But strategically, I think the key question would be is, how do we position ourselves to counter this threat? I mean, do we come together? Do we need a think tank? How do we approach this to actually counter this threat that SIPAC obviously will pose, even if it's not in the short term, but in the longer term?
Well, I'd say that, the surest way might be very difficult, but it's inescapable, and that is to build a mass movement. And in South African terms, that's a working class movement. So the Palestinian issue and defense of Iranian sovereignty, organized working class, which is, is the most potent force outside of the moneyed class. Unfortunately, what's left of the left in South Africa, we've seen that the unions, with hundreds of thousands of members, if not millions, have been completely depoliticized. The alliance between COSATU, the SACP, and the ANC has rendered COSATU totally impotent. There's no political education. I mean, we as activists have tried to engage with NUMSA and NUM regarding the coal boycott, and we've actually been blocked. Not officially, because officially they're for Palestine, but in actual practice, they bar us from meeting their shop stewards, never mind the rank and file membership. And when we've suggested in our own ranks that we must picket outside NUMSA and NUM, then there's reluctance. No, we can't alienate those comrades. But they're not comrades. They've sold out to the forces that are subjugating the South African working class and also on a global scale. So I think the solidarity movement has to really rethink itself, because the workers in Italy, they have been quite extraordinary. They've blocked all cargo to Israel. Now Spain, a socialist government, has also blocked American aircraft from using their airspace. So it is possible to confront the hegemon. But at the same time, it's coming from a left which is conscious of its own power as a mass movement. Now, we can say that in South African terms, we've got elections coming up, but who do we vote for? And that is the problem. I believe with Naledi Pandor, out of the cabinet, that we are facing a serious threat. But I think for Ramaphosa, it would be such a climb down to withdraw the ICJ case. He would lose face completely. And that he can't do. But he's not taking any other step to isolate Israel or to say to the United States, look, you're not going to dictate to us. If we want to deal with Russia and China and Iran, that's our prerogative. We're not going to bar business with the United States, but we're not going to seek favors either. So the way that the AGOA Treaty was advertised as make or break for the South African economy is a complete lie. It is actually just a few percentage points of our exports. So there's a lot of mystification about the impact investment in South Africa. We should demand within BRICS that China and Russia and Brazil take off its market to us. I think we have to be bold that the global south is too timid in terms of taking on the hegemon. I mean, Cuba is being starved of oil. Only, I think, in the next day or two that a big Russian tanker is going to provide a much-needed boost to their oil reserves. Brazil seems to be asleep. I'm just saying this because I don't see the South African problem in isolation. The fact is the global left has to be revived so that we have independent class politics, which is based on, obviously, non-racism and the end of the domination of these oligarchs who are throttling the world economy.
Yes, Allan. But also, Paul, when one looks at the United States of America, and particularly now under Donald Trump, and we see many Americans have learned a bitter lesson. And the lesson they've taken, obviously, being ruled by the Epstein class, but also the influence that AIPAC has wielded over America, over its politicians as well, and who Donald Trump has actually put in government with him. Now, if we draw that comparison of AIPAC and SAIPAC in South Africa is a very different kettle of fish. It's a different scenario. But again, we know there are certain dangers where, particularly looking at our social situation, our socio-economic situation in this country, poverty, food insecurity. All these things are factors that could, in the long-term, impact. And when we spoke early on about being vulnerable, these are areas of concern. And it is clear that the billionaire class will take advantage of this situation, and it could impact on us politically again in the long term, even in terms of election outcomes going into the future. We know we're going to a local government election now, but again, Cyril Ramaphosa is not going to be in government. What happens in the next term? Are they grooming politicians to basically take over? Because these are obviously plans that are made well in advance, Paul.
I wanted to just pick up on something Allan said about, yes, the elections coming up, but the question is who to vote for, okay? And Allan also spoke about the solidarity movement in the left, sort of globally, if there is still such a thing as the left, not being a movement for itself. This whole idea about becoming confident and conscious, and not just a class in itself, but a class for itself, to sort of quote Marx himself, okay? I think there's I would agree, I think, with where Allan was going with that talk about BRICS. I mean, if you look at China and Russia and the way they are so hesitant around the dealings with a clearly perfidious Trump and the USA, and unable to draw a line and stand by the line, and unable to show the world and Trump and the US and Mossad and whatever that there are red lines that they better not cross. I think that's all a sign of this lack of identity, lack of confidence in the midst of this existing imperial power that is flaying about because it seems to not have answers anymore, and is losing its own sense of control. But to come back to the point I wanted to make, I think in the solidarity movement and in other progressive movements in South Africa, we lack a certain sense of being for ourselves also around state power. Now, one of the big differences between now and pre-94 is that you can actually, if you are a very strong civil movement, extra-parliamentary, you can actually put up candidates, and you can create and educate candidates who will be independent and who will be accountable and recallable. And the local government election is an ideal opportunity for that, because 50% of all councils are elected at the ward level directly. And all we need to do is to target certain areas in certain municipalities. I think particularly of the Drakensberg municipality close to where I live, where I know there's a strong solidarity movement, and put our efforts into election campaigns. And if you only get, let's say, 15%, you'd be doing damn well. If you get 10% of candidates, you've got a bridgehead, you've got an inroad, you've got access to certain resources, and you can now create a base for expanding that message. And the problem with being caught up in mobilizing and responding to events outside, like, oh, SIPAC's arrived now, okay? I mean, the SAZF and its network's been around for a long time before SIPAC arrived. Is that we don't focus on and work at the medium-term strategic issues. We get caught up in the moment. We get distracted by our very opponents, and it drains our energy. And it's interesting if you look at the rise of the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, the far-right party, which was a Eurosceptic party of a great minority about 2013. They're now the largest political party in Germany nationally. They've just won a state that was traditionally social democratic. That's the way these things rise and they happen. They don't happen overnight, but they happen much faster than you think. And so I see our biggest weakness is we're too hung up on mobilizing and protesting. That mustn't stop. That's where it starts. But we've got to also start focusing on organizing and helping others to organize around bread and butter issues inside South Africa, inside townships. We all come with very, very particular experiences and skill. I mean, Allan's richly endowed with labor history, the labor movement. I've done decades of work in and with government around housing and urban policy and funding. I know how it works inside the system, okay? People like us are going to go there pro bono and give a grouping of activists the type of enriched sort of strategic input and content they're never going to get anywhere else. And we need a couple of those victories, okay? And then again in 2030 or 2031, whenever the next election is, it needs to build on that, you know, not to stop any of the protesting and the coal and all those issues in between, not to stop the stuff alerting us to SIPAC, et cetera, but also in addition to.
Well, certainly, Paul, but also, Allan, I think, you know, when we're talking about this being an ideological battle as well in terms of SIPAC and what its stated aims, objectives, and their long-term plans are as well. And when you look at South Africa again, and I'd like to talk about media in particular, because from what Paul is saying, that we need to go out, we need to reach out, because the media is not reaching out. The media is not talking about SIPAC. The media is not talking about the long-term danger. So clearly there is a media battlefield, and there is obviously, even in terms of information and how information is disseminated. So then nobody's talking about it, and a large portion of the country is not aware of what the three of us are actually talking about this evening. And the key issue here is, you know, how does one actually approach this, and more importantly, to get this message? Because, you know, one doesn't want to wake up one morning and just find out that, you know, something has happened in this country, and you've got, you've lost being a sovereign nation, or someone's taken over something in this country. You know, we don't want to see that surprise, Allan.
No, I agree with you in what Paul had said too, that we've got the immediate responses to crises. There we have demonstrations and so forth, picketing, memoranda. But until we actually really take the question of state power seriously, we're going to be on the margins. Now, how do you achieve that type of change? It's not a quick and easy path. And it starts with intellectuals, with activists from the middle class playing a critical role in working with working class communities. Now, that happened in the 1980s, where middle-class intellectuals played a key role in building trade unions. Obviously, there were also many black intellectuals who were together with white intellectuals. But the fact is that the unions came from a collaboration, a class collaboration. Now, today, we've got a blight. We have an NGO class of intellectuals who are cut off, who are distanced from the mass base. And the mass base is not engaging at all with key political issues. And the union leadership and the civic leadership is saying, no, we're apolitical. We can't take sides unless, of course, they're in a coalition with a particular party like COSATU is. Now, FEDUSA is a massive federation, and it is largely apolitical. So there are over 1 million members in FEDUSA, many of them in the public sector. but they're not in any way engaged with issues of sovereignty and of geopolitical status. Now, South Africa used to be seen as a key country in Africa. Nigeria then replaced us. Both countries have now fallen off the pedestal, and the African Union seems to be completely directionless. Have we heard statements? Have we seen any sort of campaigns coming from the African Union with respect to the genocide in Gaza? No. Have we seen any statements now about Iran? I certainly haven't. So Africa has been, if you like, sidelined from these very, very important global contestations. And of course, as South Africans, we still have the legacy of the old apartheid sense that we're not part of Africa. We're still this European outpost. So we have neo-colonial thinking about world politics. Lastly, just to say that the mass media, the corporate media, we understand where their loyalties lie because we see their reporting. Now, the internet, on the other hand, is very rich with alternative media, but for most South Africans, they can't afford data. So they're cut off from those sources of information. Yeah, so it's going to be a long and slow road to rebuild a mass working class movement in which middle class intellectuals and activists play a real role, not just a supplementary or token role.
Yes, obviously, Paul, this is a huge topic and still requires a lot more in-depth understanding. And I'm sure this is something that we will be exploring over a period of time and also taking a look at the role of the media and also like-minded people, activists, organizations, and also a reach to the masses around the country to get to grips with the true extent, the nature of the beast, and the problem that we are actually going to be faced with. When you have organizations like SAPAC who have wield so much influence and power. But we've got about 2 or 3 minutes, and just quickly, just to round up, just some final thoughts from you, Paul, before we get Allan to comment.
Yeah, look, I think Allan, I think the conversation's going right on the mark where it should be, okay? And I think Allan made some very strong points that I can only support. And just, a short anecdote about a campaign out in the Western Cape by part of the Solidarity movement that protested against Bob Herself giving a keynote address at the Afrikaanse Handelsinstituut in Drakenstein. Bob Herself is part of this bigger billionaire ideological BizNews ideological sort of struggle that's going on. And that was and they relented. They relented because a large membership of our Drakenstein is black from small entrepreneurs and small businesses and all of that. In the very area where I was talking about, we could start working towards a local government strategy that I mentioned earlier. So yes, Allan said it also. It's long and it's slow, but you don't build anything substantial without having the foundation. And I think what you are building, if you're doing it properly, it starts taking on a momentum of its own. You're making yourself less and less necessary to the process as you pass information on to a very hungry group of grassroots activists. And the sooner we get going, the better. And let us never forget that IPAC, SAPAC, SAZF, SAJBOD, their weakest point is on the ground. That's their weakest point, okay? That's our strongest potential point. And we're not focused enough and exploiting that the way we should be.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. Allan, final thoughts from you?
Just a quick, it's connected but maybe different. I think also we have to put the spotlight more on this fascist tendency within the Jewish community. We've got purported Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein from the Orthodox religious tendency. And he spouts the most extraordinary vitriol against the government, against the ANC, against the South African state, against our very anti-apartheid position in the world. And he publicizes videos, which, as I say, are vitriolic. And he does so in the name of freedom of speech. And we had a meeting with the SABC recently, coordinated by Hassan Lorkhat, where we took them to task that they're giving the Zionist lobby equal time, if not more, than to the solidarity groupings. And how can this be the case? Would you give a neo-Nazi the same time to, proclaim their vicious ideology as you would to someone who stands for equal rights and human dignity? Of course not. Hate speech, and I consider Goldstein to be a proponent of hate speech, should be tackled by the state and by civil society. We're a bit too flexible about freedom of speech in this sense.
Yeah.
And he influences many people to support the extremist nature of the Israeli state.
Well, certainly, Allan. In fact, I've heard, a lot of the venom that he actually spews out as well, and it is something that that has been brought up over and over again in terms of why is the government not taking the action, especially when we're talking about hate speech. But for now, Paul Hendler, member of PSC, and Allan Horwitz, South African Jews for a Free Palestine, we thank both of you for taking time out with us on Salam Media this evening. All the best to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, and to you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of this evening's broadcast of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, and once again, a very interesting topic. And just to quote Faiz Jacobs, his response to this SIPEC lobby, where he says, we did not defeat apartheid only to become vulnerable to new forms of pressure dressed up as lobbying, philanthropy, diplomacy, religion, or shared values. And I think this is very, very important so that we don't become vulnerable, considering where we are as a country, considering our situation right now, considering there are so many social and socio-economic issues that this country is faced with. And ultimately, it is politicians and the political class that is going to bear the brunt of this. And we've seen it with the ANC as well. Systematic, in fact, there's been a decline in their power base over a period of time, and it will be interesting to see what happens in the next election. But I think more importantly is we need people in this country that are going to be strong enough to confront these threats that organizations and lobby groups like SIPEC actually pose to the country, because in the long term, let us not compromise what our forefathers, and especially those in this country, who have fought so hard for, given their blood, their sweat, and the tears for our democracy. And one cannot see the erosion of our democracy as a result of organizations like SIPEC taking advantage of the situation that we find ourselves in. And with that comment, I'm going to take leave of you. Once again, it's been an absolute pleasure being with you, for myself and the team at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.